and welcome back to the UKSIF Leadership Podcast. It's Sally here. I'm delighted to tell you that we are back for our third year in 2023 with a full series covering everything from retrofitting and hydrogen to ESG and sovereign debt, regulatory updates, and a lot more. This new series will be kicking off in May, but until then we have an extra special episode for you. At our Ownership Day in March, we had an excellent session on the new Social Issues Taskforce, moderated by our policy manager, Heidi Douglas Osborne. We're delighted to be able to share this recording with you. Hope you enjoy it.
So to introduce my two panellists, Maria Nazarova-Doyle, Head of Responsible Investment and Stewardship at Scottish Widows. At Scottish Widows, Maria leads the work on incorporating responsible investment and active stewardship principles in the investment portfolio. She has previously held senior DC investment roles at Mercer and JLT. She is a spokesperson on responsible investment matters, a regular contributor to pension and sustainable finance industry events, and a professional awards judge. She is also, the most importantly, part of the UKSIF board and policy committee.
Thank you very much to everybody who voted for me.
Not quite finished yet, but she also volunteers at the PMI Advisory Council, ABI Climate Change and Stewardship Working Groups, Occupational Pensions, Stewardship Council, and a number of government-led task force. So on to my second panellist.
Competition, I have to say.
So my second panellist, Valeria Piani, Head of Stewardship at Phoenix Group. She joined the firm in September 2021 to lead a stewardship team and collaborate with Phoenix Asset Management partners to influence ESG performance by investee companies. She has over 15 years of experience in the industry and has led a number of senior positions at different firms. She joined UBS Asset Management in 2017 as a strategic engagement lead responsible for the manager's climate change engagement program, stewardship reporting, and ESG integration research in the industrial sector. Prior to this, Valeria worked for 9 years as Associate Director at the UN-backed Principles for Responsible Investment, as you all know, PRI, where she managed a team of 11 members responsible for coordinating investor collaborative engagement activities with companies on a range of ESG issues. So, thank you for joining us today. So recently, the Task Force on Social Factors was announced. This has been underway for quite a while. These two have been busily behind the scenes sort of working on this. So Maria, would you like to say a little bit about what the group's for and sort of the intentions of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not a secret, that climate has been taken center stage in pensions in particular for quite some time, and it's been great, right? This has been, probably as fast as nothing has ever moved in pensions in terms of pension schemes actually embracing the need to look at climate, consider climate in the investment strategies, and maybe to a lesser degree in stewardship, but still, I think the way pensions industry embraced climate has been great. But the same has not yet been seen in on the social side of things, so the S of ESG. And irrespective of the fact that DWP made it pretty clear that ES&G, financial material factors that are within ES&G, all need to be taken into account by schemes, we've not really seen the same progress. And when DWP has had a look around in terms of what's actually happening, so that's now almost 2 years ago, I think, when they did the call for evidence to see what schemes are doing on social factors, it wasn't really much, so I think they were pretty disappointed, with the adoption of S. When they were seeing quite high adoption of E. So that's where the task force idea was born, to, not try to whip the whip and crack the whip, and say, you must do S, but more about how do we help trustees, how do we help pension schemes actually understand the materiality of S factors, help them get around this very, very highly complicated subject. It's we think climate is hard, but at least we have this metric of carbon and everybody sort of coalesced around it, and it's sort of making sense, right? And when you start looking at social issues and how intertwined they are and how different they are from industry to industry, from company to company, it's a minefield, right? So perhaps it's not surprising the trustees have not quite kind of jumped into it. it. So that the point is of this task force is to basically help, so then we'll say if, what happens after we help them, if that actually moves the dial or not. But at this stage, it's just how do we give trustees the tools to embrace S of ESG.
So following on from that, Valeria, is there sort of anything else the group means to you, or?
Well, we just started to work, so I think we met twice since we launched it. So we're really starting to understand what our objectives are. There are 3 work streams connected to the task force. One is where Maria is, which I think more about making the case for us and why it's important in the financial industry. The work stream I'm part of is more related to the data source, which is a monumental task because it's about actually try to provide some guidance on what data trustees can use, categorize them, explain why they're useful, not what they are, trying to add a little bit of a qualitative assessment, provide case studies, and even thinking of what is the data flow that you need as a trustee coming from the asset manager community. And should we create something that is only S-oriented, or should we try to embed it, which is a little bit my preference, into the usual information requirements that we ask our asset managers from. And the third work stream is more related to modern slavery specifically and helping the trustees to understand, again, what it means and how they can track and manage modern slavery more broadly. I think we're all grasping a little bit with the challenge, though, that trustees can come from very different type of schemes. You can have very small schemes where there's pretty much no resources and they rely very heavily on advisors and what the asset managers are telling them and how they're managing their assets. But they also workplace pension schemes that actually have more resources. They have internal stewardship teams, or they have some professionals on ENSNG able to actually screen portfolios. So we're trying to issue a guidance that tries to meet the requirements of both. So it cannot be too simplistic for one category and cannot be too complicated for the other one. So I think we are grasping a little bit with that challenge of finding something that is useful, but it does have a very diversified target of audience.
So Maria, a little bit more on your group.
Yeah, sure. So we have an exciting task, I think. So not as maybe challenging as Valeria, I have to say, but a very exciting one to sort of set out the case, as you said, set out the case for S. Help explain to trustees how S factors are actually material. Build up with case studies. Really help them see clearly how it's aligned with fiduciary duty. So it's not something that goes beyond their current obligations. It's firmly in line with their current obligations, and actually by not embracing S factors in their investment strategies and stewardship, they're actually not really doing their jobs right. So we're doing all of this. We're looking into systems level stewardship, and systemic issues. So kind of echoing what the FCA is currently saying in their discussion paper. Looking at the asset universal owner concept. And all of this kind of finally culminates in trying to clarify the roles and responsibilities of everybody in the investment chain in the market, and that's not just asset owners, trustees and asset managers, but it's also data providers, civil society, government regulators, so all the actors that need to kind of come together and play their part to make sure that social factors are properly embedded into investment strategies of pension schemes. And we're also trying to set out a framework for what good looks like. Again, as Valeria says, keeping in mind all the different varieties of schemes, DB versus DC, like a fully mature DB scheme that about to go to buy out, fully invested in UK gilts will have different S challenges, to a DC schemes, mostly with young population and pretty much nearly fully invested in equities and globally, right? So very different challenges for different schemes. But we're trying to kind of take a step back and say, well, generally, notwithstanding all this difference, what does good look like? What do we expect as sort of a minimum expectation to say, like, all schemes should at least be able to do that? What's best practice and what's actually market leading? So if you want to aim for that, so what are the things that you should be doing? So really excited about that. And I think in terms of Valeria's group, for me, one of the good points that are coming out of it will be essentially myth busting, because I often hear this thing, well, we can't really do anything on S because there's no data. There's too much data. That's actually the real issue with S, right? So there's just so much data from so many different sources, and it's really hard to wade through and understand what's decision making kind of useful, right, and what's actually applicable to your portfolio. So I'm really looking forward to the results, because I'll also use those results, in my work.
Yeah, in a way I did it selfishly too, because I feel I need this work for our own organization. So hopefully we can try to find a common framework. But I think on the problem with S is everybody's always saying it cannot be measured, we can't do anything with that. Well, let's move on. And let's then think, okay, this is difficult, you don't have a hard data that you can play with, but there's plenty of data. But the problem is just comes from different sources. You have data coming from legislation, you have data coming from the companies, you have data coming from the service providers, and then you have a plenty of data coming from NGOs and civil society. And one contributor in the work stream last time actually made a very good point that the data from NGO is free, but not necessarily is better, and the data from the service provider is commercial, but not necessarily so comprehensive. So how do we strike a balance? And even if you look at the NSNG service provider space, I'll share a very concrete example here. When we tried to build internally a very simple tool on controversies, we wanted to understand if our portfolios were related to outrageous controversies in breach of what we call the UN Global Compact principles. We look at different service providers and try to find some correlation, so we could use different sources and try with a common denominator and say, okay, we really focus on what everybody's agreeing on is a controversy. We look at two, they had thousands of data points, they agreed on 2 companies have been a serious breach of a UN Global Compact principle. So again, how can we try to find a common ground on what is a clear impact from a social perspective? And I think in terms of our role here is also to equip the trustees to ask the right questions. So once we say, okay, this is the data that you could look at, this is the coverage, this is the focus, is how actually you challenge the managers, because at the end of the day, it is the role of the managers to make use of that data. So do they only rely on the data passively? Do they integrate this data into some level of integration tool? Do they add their own assessment on these cases? Do they actually talk to the people impacted by these cases, which is a very interesting angle? Do the PM add any qualitative assessment on it, or again, is a passive tool? So I think it's really twofold, is what is the data and what are the questions that you can ask?
That's really interesting. Sort of taking that forward and what you're learning so far, even from just the 2 meetings of the group, like how is it influencing your work with Phoenix Group?
Not yet, I think, because we are at the beginning. But we do ourselves, for example, are at that stage where we feel we need to start to do some due diligence on the investment portfolio. So we started a journey on S through developing a human rights framework. Today will be discussed by the board in the afternoon, so hopefully I can tell to the external world that we have it. We don't have it yet, but it's finalized. It took us 18 months to get there, because it wasn't just a policy for us as an investor. It intended to be a policy for us as an employer, as a procurer, as a service provider, and as an investor. So we really created a working group internally to look at all these 4 different dimensions. And we also decided to use the UN Guiding Principles as the framework of reference. So it's not just about having the policy, is then do due diligence and then provide remedies. So the 3 elements are very important. We only got to the policy level. So the next stage is the due diligence of portfolios, which means looking at thousands of companies, trying to bring it down to what sectors are more potentially risky, what geographies, what business models, drag it down again into research to companies, and then decide what do we take care of directly and what we delegate to the managers. So it's definitely a multi-year process, and the data is the first starting point, but it's only the first starting point.
So Maria, taking that sort of forward with Scottish Widows, I'm sure many of the audience read your Just Transition piece last year. Sort of where do you see going forward with Scottish Widows this?
Just with social factors and just transition? Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this sounds fascinating. I would love to read, what you come up with, actually, so hopefully it will be public. So we do ours slightly differently. So we, as an asset owner, we've tried to focus on the top holdings in our portfolio, and it's essentially a lot of intense manual work, trying to go through kind of company by company, do our own research to see which social factors are material, and particularly, human rights is one of our top stewardship priorities. So again, it's not as easy as just go to a data provider and say, can you give me a flag for human rights? You have to actually really understand the industries, but then the companies within the industries as well, because they're not all necessarily affected in the same way. So yeah, intense manual work. But in terms of just transition, there has been a discussion on this already, so probably not going to go through all the important points, but it's so fundamental to actually having a transition. So I honestly don't think we can have a transition. I think that it will be stopped, so if we leave people behind, they will quickly find political representation that will just stop all the efforts that we're trying to point towards achieving the net zero transition and the decarbonization of the economy. It has to be, with people in mind, and also we absolutely cannot not learn from examples of big economic transitions in the past, and we absolutely cannot create stranded people because we're worried about stranded assets, but if the transition isn't just, we will have stranded people as well, and that's like the worst outcome it can possibly be. It's not our first rodeo, right? We've done this before, we've transitioned before, from coal to oil and gas, and like other types of economic transitions. So we really should learn from the mistakes of the past and just do it in an equitable manner so that we don't exacerbate inequalities, but instead we try to level things up, and just do it all together. And today is International Women's Day, so probably just say a couple of words on gender, because there's so many aspects of the just transition, but gender is one of the kind of biggest ones actually sitting there. Women are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change, and they represent 80% of a group of people across the world who are misplaced by the effects of climate change, and they really just bear the brunt of it all, and yet they're severely underrepresented in decision making. So I've read just today actually that there's only about 20% of women in sort of government and ministerial positions across the world. Obviously population-wise it's about 51%. So there's a really big discrepancy. So women are not making decisions about what's actually affecting them the most, and they're the most affected group. And Project Drawdown has estimated that about 80 billion tons of carbon can be sequestered or reduced, from the atmosphere by 2030 or 2050. That's the one bit I'm just a bit fuzzy on, but basically a really, really huge amount of carbon can be saved or sequestered if we only do two things. So one is give women access to family planning, and also give women fair access to education. And if we do those two things, that's the effect, right? And even if you not worried about equality in itself, think about the carbon saving, that could be produced. So it really is very important. And education is not just good for mitigation, it's also good for adaptation as well. There was a recent study in coastal Thailand where they've looked at women educated to secondary level in coastal villages, and they found that just 1% increase in number of women in the village being educated to secondary level led to 11% higher chance that that the village will withstand a natural disaster like a tsunami, because it will be more prepared. And the researchers put it down to two things. One is women, once they're educated to secondary level degree, they're actually better at abstract thinking. They can imagine the event that's never happened before and find ways of mitigating it and being prepared for it. But also women are more social, so they share the knowledge, so it kind of has this like really healthy multiplier effect. So if you have just a few women who are educated, they will tell their friends what to do, how to kind of prepare their homes, how to do flood defenses and things like that. So again, just a really strong argument, I think, for supporting women, supporting equality, and making this an equitable world. So that's two bits. Oh yeah, and then what we're doing in the just transition. Sorry.
By the way.
Yeah. So obviously it's absolutely embedded in all our engagements with companies. So we expect them to really think hard about the just transition. If there's things like, say, on climate, when they put their climate strategies, net zero strategies to the vote, we will not vote for them unless they have a really strong just transition element to it. So they show us that they have thought about it and have planned for it. We are part of the Just Transition Challenge, which is an industry initiative to try and create a just transition label for investment funds. So not like SDR, but it's a voluntary label for asset managers and kind of asset owners that want to use to say that this particular investment strategy is actually kind of just transition aligned. So not just in terms of the investments, but in decision making as well, right, in terms of community voice and things like that. So it's really interesting work. So I think it's just now out for consultation. So if you're interested, please share your thoughts, contribute to the consultation. So we've kind of have a first draft of what we think this might look like, and it's out now.
Cool. Thank you for that summary, Maria. Valeria, was there any sort of points that Maria touched on?
To many. Maybe just a transition to start from. We did some research ourselves too. We have a climate engagement program that we are conducting internally. We selected 25 companies. They were the one related to 40% of our finance emissions, so quite concentrated actually in the end. And we decided to do a lot of it through collaborative engagement. So we're taking up some leading position on climate action 100+, for example. But to be able to prepare, as always on engagement, we did our own analysis of each company, and we included an element of just transition in the scorecard that we use. We actually made our expectation on climate change available on our website, so you can actually see how the scorecard is composed and how the just transition is named there. And out of the 25 companies in the list, 11 mentioned the just transition. So they do acknowledge that there will have to be some level of impact on laborers and communities, and they need to take care of. But if you go to the next level and understanding what actually the program, only 3 were particularly serious with an agenda, a strategy, some metrics, very transparent on the impact they're having, and we're hoping to see more of this actually expanding to more companies. I think Climate Action 100+ has helped there, as they are developing this indicator within the Climate Action 100+ framework. It will be available at the end of 2023, so the companies are getting ready to get more questions and prepare the data for it, which I think is useful. One only observation, though, is we talk a lot about the just transition on the assets that we need to get rid of. But what about the just transition of the assets we are getting into? And I think it shouldn't be forgotten, and we should ask the companies to take an holistic approach. And it's not just about the direct operation, it's about also joint ventures, it's about foreign operations. And again, the just transition argument tends to be only where they tend to be more exposed or where their home country, but not across all operations. So there's definitely more to do, and hopefully it's just a starting point for us now. And with the data from Climate Action 100+, we will have more comparison from one company to another. On gender, I think while I was thinking and reflecting on what you were saying on empowering women, from our own perspective, what I was quite shocked about is the gender pay gap, to be honest. We measure that it's around 30% in the UK. And I think linking this to diversity and inclusion in the way we engage with companies is very important, because the gender pay gap is one thing, but the pension pay gap is related to it. The reason why women don't have pension is because they have part-time jobs or they barely work. And the other insights that we got on the attitude of women to finance, which I find interesting, is when we ask our customers on more generally their attitude to sustainable investing in ESG issues, the ones that tended to care mostly were women or young generation, but the ones that felt less equipped to make financial decisions were women. So they were saying, we care, we think we have a role to play, but we don't think we are equipped to actually make financial decision. I'm not generalizing too much, but men actually, when they responded to the same survey, used to say, I'm very confident on what I'm deciding to put my money in, and I'm not 100% that actually care about the impact of this money. So again, I'm generalizing and making quite an extreme case, but I think we as life insurance service providers have a role to play. We need to equip these customers to actually make this decision and push us even harder to be, fostering sustainable investment.
Just quickly sort of add to that, so because the gender pension gap is real, right? So gender pay gap, yes, but gender pension gap for us as pension providers is a real thing. So you've been doing work on this, and I'm sure some of you will have seen, the Scottish Widows kind of campaign around today, International Women's Day. finding that we'll do it every year, to be honest, and we'll do like different angles on it to try and highlight the scale of the problem. So this year we're highlighting that on average a woman will retire with £123,000 less than a man, and that's kind of a generic average, but as you can imagine, it's not going down well on social media when people are saying, well, I'm not even going to have 120,000 at all, you're talking about a difference. And mostly people are saying that this gender pay gap is a hoax, so it doesn't exist. Women just choose to work less, and if you work less you get less, so that's what you get. And it is shocking to read in 2023, to kind of look at this thinking, wow, we're still actually there. Still, it's women's choice, to work less because they can't afford childcare, because their partners, expect them to be at home. It's their choice not to get promotions, or their choice not to be bold enough to ask for a pay rise because how society conditioned them. So it's quite painful to read, but at the same time, we continue to shine the light on the problem.
So we've had quite a few questions come in. Won't have time to go through all of them. My apologies. But so the top voted one is, what useful social metrics, if any, are out that pension schemes could be drawing on already to inform their decision making? Valeria, do you want to come in?
I think it's too early to say. We're just doing the work. Sorry.
Don't preempt it.
Don't preempt it, exactly.
The big reveal at the end.
Exactly. I can say what I'm very eager on, but I think it's related to, again, the fact that we're coming from the sector where we're coming from. I think we need to look at human capital management, and we need to look at how employees are nurtured, mentored, trained, and retained. So you could always look at the turnover figures to start with, but you need to go beyond. I think you need to understand the culture, how it's embedded, how they actually believe that people are an asset for the company. And again, going back to pensions and contributions, we clearly know that the way majority of people are not saving enough, and they will not have the pensions they need to keep the same quality of life they have, and they probably have to work much longer. But are the companies equipped to hire and keep people that they are more than 50s or go beyond the 60s? Again, it's a human capital conversation. We try as a company to do as much as we can to retrain, to make sure that when we go out to the market, we're completely bias free. You can't be completely bias free, but try to really look at a diverse pool of employees. So it's not just about diversity of gender, diversity of ethnicities, diversity of age that is quite important too.
So Maria, this question's for you. What role would you like to see data providers, MSCI, Sustainalytics, Bloomberg play in supporting data sources?
We're still working on it, but just from kind of my personal view, I would like data providers to work more with asset owners, investors, and then sort of kind of becoming then the conduit of our demands. So so we'll go to companies and we'll write to them and say you need to disclose X, but actually data providers work with those companies already. They get this data, so they use it. So kind of joining us in our quest for better data and being more of a conduit to those kind of client demands. That would be really quite good. And there'll be a few other recommendations, but watch that space.
So just to sneak in one last question from our previous panellist. Do you face any nervousness from government about some of the topics you're considering? Example, accusations of wokery, culture war. I don't know which one of you two would like to pick that up.
We probably don't want to answer. We have government representations in the task force.
Yeah, we have a lot.
They're observers. They listen to every conversation. Now, hopefully we will be inspiring them. I don't think we can say more than that.
It's never really come up, right? I mean, yeah.
If
the question is, do we sense it? I would probably say no. Whether they're thinking it is a different question. I can't answer that, But, yeah.
Well, going on the first of that statement, thank you both for speaking. It was lovely to have you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that session. There are plenty more on the way, so remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Maybe even throw us a rating or review. It all helps. See you soon.